Okay. So, moving into um, kind of the regulation space, we talked about this regulation a bit on the last series of news articles we did. So, interestingly, when I picked out the news for this week or this series, the pattern seemed to be very similar to the previous set. A lot about regulation, and a lot of we'll show some others later. But this one, both interesting and chilling at the same time, where it shows perspective is important. China's algorithm law comes into effect to curb big tech's sway in public opinion. And interesting to look at this. Regulation marks a bold attempt by Beijing to tame the use of recommendation algorithms in apps and websites. So we know that recommendation in a lot of social media applications are basically forcing people or trembling them into areas perhaps that are not that healthy. And we see it all the time. I see it in YouTube where you look at one video and suddenly it thinks that's the only thing that's interesting in your entire life, and it wants to pound you with that.
Yeah.
So on the surface, this looks like regulation to curb that by giving the public the ability to, it says, allow users to decline personalized recommendation. But here's the other side: promote positive energy. So what does that mean? Well, let's imagine that you're the regulator, in this case, the CCP, or whoever it happens to be, and you can start saying what is and what is not fake news. And so you can, in this case, close down accounts that were spreading provocative content related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, surprisingly, because this is South China Morning Post, it uses the word invasion. You could remove any recommendation that used the word invasion, for example, and replace it with something else. So we see a lot of, in today's world, we're seeing a lot of information and disinformation. So the flip side of this regulation is it's giving the government the power to actually determine themselves what is and is not recommendable. And so this is where AI, if you're into AI ethics, this is where you should be looking, and not the kind of stuff you are looking at, but where governments can actually regulate and change the direction of recommendations, and that's a great power. And with great power comes great responsibility, or great manipulation, I guess.
I'd like to break this apart too. I think this one's really interesting because there are really two pieces to this. One is content moderation, and then the second is algorithmic, let's say, floating to the top of we want this content. Now, the current algorithms are floating to the top or sort of scoring more highly things that you've more recently looked at. So you look at puppy dogs, you get more puppy dogs, as you said. Whereas this is more angled at, we want you to float to the top more content that we believe promotes positive energy, i.e. says good things about the CCP or promotes our government policies or whatever those particular things are, as opposed to floats to the top things that what is that the whistleblower from Facebook said, Hagen, whatever her name is, who said, drives engagement, i.e. triggers the amygdala, triggers the fear mechanism, and is basically sets you up into a negative feedback loop where you see more and more and more negativity.
So that on the surface is what this is trying to do. So I'm not trying to bash the CCP in this regard, but
right.
What you have to understand is what a technology is aimed at doing on the surface is not what's important. It's what it can do that's important, because it will be used for what it can do.
Yes, exactly.
That's where you need to be really looking. How far can this go? And it will go that far because people in power love power.
Of course.
They are.
Right, wherever. It doesn't matter which country it is. Yeah, but I think there are almost three levels of that. There's what they say the intention of the policy is. There's what's the actual intention of the policy, and there's what can the thing do taken to its extreme once the policy's in place. I think there's almost 3 degrees of that. Yeah, this stuff is super interesting. I think the idea, I mean, we saw it early on with Instagram or Snapchat, or I don't know, Snapchat, but Instagram in particular, Facebook in particular, LinkedIn, I think, was doing it as well, where people revolted in the early days. They're like, why are you changing these timelines? I just want to see things that happened in time order from the people I'm connected to. And then suddenly it was, here's this promoted post and that promoted post, and the timeline blew up. And it was no longer time-based, but was priority-based. And I think a lot of people just got really irked by that, but then they just got over it because whatever, these companies were like, we need to fund ourselves somehow.
Yeah.
And we want to drive engagement, which drives ad revenue.
So
I do think the idea of shutting off personalized recommendations is an interesting one, but not then layering on top. By the way, we can now also overrule that and promote our own positive energy or whatever policies we want. That seems to be like directly in conflict.
That the takeaway for everyone from this is buzzword of the day: promote positive energy.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I'm okay with that, but I don't think in this
doesn't mean
context
that.
it means what we want it to mean.
Exactly. Just be careful what your positive energy is.
Define that.
Define that.